So I, like many out there, probably enjoy a really good documentary from time to time, depending on what the subject could possibly be. You know, we have a lot of documentaries out there, whether they're new or up and coming, or restrictive to certain streaming services. Netflix has a huge array of extremely good documentaries that's hard to find outside of Netflix. Then you have some that are kind of on like every platform, and between the ones that are easily accessible to people and those that are not, Shudder has two so far in a series of documentaries that they've been doing called In Search of Darkness. Now, because of those documentaries, which are great, however, they do take up a lot of time. In watching both of the documentaries they have out for it right now, I have discovered so many movies from the 70s and the 80s in the horror genre that I hadn't really given the opportunity up until this point. And we're talking these movies are now 30, 40 years old, or even 50 years old in some respects. So from those two films, I got two lists together of films that I'm trying to add into my list of films I have in my collection, as well as films that I want to watch. Now, they talk about a lot of films in these two documentaries. I would say they probably talk about roughly 250 different films. Maybe I'm a little over-exaggerating, but let's just use that as a solid number. Out of, 250, I'm looking at, 100 of them that was really something that I'm like, oh, you know what, that looks pretty cool. Oh, I never heard of that one. Oh, wait, this director did this. Oh, this actor was in this. So you know what? I picked out about 100 or so, give or take, films, and this was one of them. So, released in 1984, I believe, or 87. It was around the mid 80s, and it's a John Carpenter film, and it was a film that's described as being him just kind of wanting to do sort of whatever he wanted to, essentially. It's written and directed by him, and it's during the decade that pretty much was him at his prime. We're coming off of a lot of great John Carpenter movies at this point in time, and this was just another film in this array of being totally out there films with great concepts just done with very minimal budgets and probably very little hope of doing much as far as, box office numbers. And I think this almost made seven times its budget, something like that, anywhere between 2 and 7 times its budget or something like that, I believe. And what it basically is, it's a film about this. So it starts off with this preacher who passes away and leaves this key to another priest who comes to see him off. Unfortunately, passed away. Here I am. We're gonna put him to rest. But he finds this key. And he discovers that the key opens up this cellar in an abandoned church. And in that cellar, there's this huge dome-like cylinder thing. It almost looks like a giant version of the Ooze from the Ninja Turtles' second live-action film. And it's swirling around and it's moving, but he senses evil. And he starts reading up on all the doctor's notes, and he finds this book that's written in 15 different languages, 4 of them which are dead, and the dialect is just all over the place. So he goes to find this teacher of quantum physics and science and logic and rationality, and he instills in him listen, I have something that has substance that you could probably test and give me answers for. Please come help me. So he takes a team of his students and a bunch of other people that are specialists in language and biomechanics and things of that nature. And they all go to this church, and some of them are told what's happening and some of them aren't. And then there's this kind of battle that while people are setting up and while people are running tests, there's this battle that the professor and the priest are having where there's a sense of, evil in the atmosphere that the priest is trying to express. But then the professor is trying to explain that, this is a substance that is, of this earth. It might be causing some kind of like chemical imbalance or something. And it's this real tug of war between the idea of science and religion. And it comes off very, very natural in the sense that it all sort of makes sense. And again, it's not even dialogued the best. The dialogue's great and the script is written very well, but with probably a few little tweaks, you could probably get really good like substance out of what a lot of the conversations are sort of about. You kind of just get like a bare minimum almost, but it's enough for you to kind of be intrigued, and you watch it with a sense of like, oh wow, like that's true. Like, is it chemical or is it supernatural? Is it something of a priest's nature that he would be able to fix, or is it something that science can explain? And that's what I find very unique about this, is because I feel like when you talk about movies in that era, a movie like this is probably very much ahead of its time when you consider that maybe there have been a couple of other films that have had like a tug of war with like the concept of science and religion. The only other film I can think of off the top of my head is a film called Incarnate, which came out maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And that's a great film where they use like science and psychology to break into the mental state of possessed humans. So, it's been used in other media, and that's just the only one example I can think of. But maybe this is the first one, and maybe this kind of set the precedent for it. I don't know. I can't think of anything before this that kind of had that tug of war, or at least had that tug of war, that contraction of these two elements, the concept of science and religion, before this, or even around the time of this, where it presented it in a way where maybe it's not explained thoroughly with dialogue, but you could see, like, plain as day that that's what the battle is. Until, of course, they wind up that it actually is something supernatural based. But along with being supernatural based, they find, like, the science behind it, and they understand that it still is of a sentient nature, and being sentient means that it has its way of kind of being able to be manipulated in some way. I don't want to give too much away, even though it's a very old film, and most people will probably, have seen it. If not, if I've never heard of it, like, I would probably say it's more than likely John Carpenter fans who really know this film. And if you've never heard about it, it's got a great cast. It's got Donald Pleasance, who I hadn't seen him do much outside of being the main psychiatry doctor in the Halloween films. It's got Victor Wong, who everybody recognizes when you see him, and he's fantastic as the professor in it. Who else has it got? It's got a couple of other people that weren't big at the time, but they became big, I think, moving forward. I think Lisa Plout became somebody big. I can't think of anybody else's name. Oh, here's a funny thing. So, in the film, again, they kind of come to the conclusion that it's a substance of sentient nature. And it's like green water. And what it's able to do is anybody who it comes in contact with almost directly, it kind of possesses them and takes control over them and allows for them to do their bidding. So now, along with gradually kind of infecting some of the people who are there in the church, there's also an army of homeless people that are in the surrounding area that are all like possessed by it. And one of them, I guess you could say even the leader of this little pack, is Alice Cooper, the rock star. He doesn't have any lines. He just pops up, is the only full-on pale-face one. And it's just hilarious to see, like, him there, but him not be that big of a deal. Like, how is one of the 3 biggest names not only not have any lines, but is just kind of not even felt like, I think if the movie is like 90 minutes long, he's in the film for maybe 6 minutes, and it's Alice Cooper, I mean, the only film that I knew that he ever did was friggin' Wayne's World, so it's just super funny that he's in there as a possessed homeless person. So I would just say that, being that this film is now 35 years old, most likely, it still kind of stands the test of time. And it's funny to think because there are times where I'll watch films from that era, and whether they're like great films or whether they're just films that have like cult followings, the time is stuck within the film. And this stands out to me because I just feel like it's this story that it holds more weight. It's not just old 80s horror. It's old 80s horror, but good storytelling too. Like, I don't think there's much they probably could have taken away to make the film any different. And the few things that I would say they could have added was just more storytelling, going deeper into the science, even going deeper into the religion. Let there be more debating between the priest and the psychologist. Like, let these two kind of go at it. Like, they have this really good moment of dialogue where they're going back and forth and they're talking about the concept of antimatter. And in this real world, the real world, in this realm that we have of, 3-dimensional and 4-dimensional concepts, antimatter means that when something is of existence, it also has an opposite existence. And so he looks at him and he goes, well, if there is meant to be some sort of religious quality to this substance, to this tube, then perhaps it's the concept that if it's being held over by godlike substances, then perhaps this is the anti-god, being that it is the negative to the positive, which is why there is this kind of evil feeling in the atmosphere, because you're dealing with something that is anti, if the world that they live in exists where religion is truly factual and God is of the essence and the almighty being that creates the good of the world, then there has to be the opposite of that being the evil. And if there's God, there has to be the anti-God. And that's what he's kind of trying to explain to the priest about how this relates to science, even though it's really, really more about the religious stuff. And it's just very well done. And it's John Carpenter. How do you go wrong with John Carpenter? This is definitely a movie that's worth sitting through again this many years after the fact. And, I'm going to throw it out there. Maybe they should reboot it. You know what I'm saying? Maybe they should give it a chance where it has more dialogue and still give it that very gritty feeling of what you get from the film. If they're able to do it where it's less special effects, less CGI, more dialogue, more tension, more of, even keep the soundtrack. Like, if there's one thing that I learned from these In Search of Darkness documentaries, it's that 80s horror films and 70s horror films had fantastic soundtracks, and you can't hold the candle to a lot of the stuff that they had back then. And maybe that's just, me and my generation who really thrive off that. I know I run into people nonstop that talk about various soundtracks from that generation, and they're just great, and they set really good tones in films, especially horror films. So let's ditch the friggin' kalimba, or whatever it is, that instrument that they've been using for like the Insidious and the Conjuring movies, and let's bring back some of these ambient techno disco, rhythm keyboard things, and let's reboot this. Let's see this film done again in this generation. Let's see the script kind of bulked up a little bit and made with a little bit more explanation, made with a little bit more dialogue. Like, I would say if this was written by like Quentin Tarantino, it would have perfect dialogue. But, even though John Carpenter is a fantastic director and writer and one of like, the top 3, I would say, in like horror movies ever, especially within the last like 50 years, John Carpenter's up there. It's still worth kind of giving this film another chance. Either if you want to watch this one, or if you want to be the person that does feel the way I feel and you want to see a reboot. I think a reboot of this film would be fantastic. Done now, done a little bit more modernized. I think it would be great. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend watching it, especially with Halloween kind of right around the corner. Bunch of horror movies in these 2 documentaries that you can probably put on your list if you haven't seen them already. So you can go out and watch those and get yourself set up for the Halloween season. It's already, it's almost September, and October's right there, so Halloween's coming up, so it's time to make a list of those horror movies. And this is one that's on my list, and I'm glad it's off, and I'm really, really surprised by it, and I think you would be too.